Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Subcommittee on Appropriations. This afternoon, we have a briefing on the Purple Line. We will start with an update from our Maryland Department of Legislative Services analyst, Steve McCulloch. Then we'll hear from the Maryland Department of Transportation, then a representative from the Montgomery County Department of Transportation. We invited the Prince George's County Department as well, but they were unable to attend. Obviously, I think everybody here knows this, but the reason we chose those two county DOTs is because those are the counties the Purple Line runs in, and both counties are participating in some of the work around the Purple Line. That was a requirement of moving forward with the project, was that there be some county participation. And then we'll, of course, have our robust Q&A. So I also note we're joined by Delegate Solomon, who's not on our subcommittee, but the Purple Line runs through his district, or someday will run through his district, and the Vice Chair of the full committee, Vice Chair Chang. So with that, let me turn it over to Steve McCulloch to take us through a piece of analysis that he had provided previously that we're applying here for this Purple Line specific briefing. Steve?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Just give you a Cliff Notes version of the background, because I'm sure everybody is fairly familiar with this project. That in the spring of 2016, the Maryland Department of Transportation, or MDOT, selected the Purple Line Transit Partners to design, build, finance, operate, maintain the Purple Line light rail transit project through a 36-year public-private partnership, or P3. That was 6 years for construction and 30 years of operating, maintaining the facility. Shortly after the selection was made, a lawsuit was brought in federal court. And during those proceedings, the record of decision for the project, which is necessary for federal funds to be expended on the project, that record of decision was vacated by the court. It was later restored on appeal. However, it resulted in more than a year's delay in the project. The delay and other issues led PLTP to file several claims for both additional time and money. However, MTA and PLTP were unable to come to an agreement, and PLTP announced that it was leaving the project due to extended delay in the critical path. There was litigation ensued, at which point the court did find for the Purple Line Transit Partners, and subsequently the design build contractor, part of that group, left the project. MTA and the Purple Line Transit Partners continued to negotiate and did resolve their differences and resolve all outstanding issues through the signing of a settlement agreement that was executed or approved by the Board of Public Works, on December of 2020. Subject to that agreement, MTA did pay in 2 installments, $250 million settlement, and the Purple Line Transit Partners agreed to procure a new design build contractor. Language that was added to the fiscal 22 budget last year did require MDOT to report to the committees on that design build contractor replacement process, and much of the information that is covered in this issue were provided through the report from that thing. So a design build contractor has been, replacement has been selected, and it was approved by the Board of Public Works at the end of January of 2022, along with amendments to the P3 contract itself. This Exhibit 1 shows the change in costs between the original agreement, which was a $5.6 billion contract, and the revised agreement, which is $9.3 billion, for a $3.7 billion increase. Now, it's important to note that those are very large numbers, but that is not just for the construction of the project. That also entails the 30 years operation and maintenance of the project. Excuse me for scrolling. The next bookmark does not work. MDOT cited several factors for the cost of the increase to the contract. the delay from the lawsuit was a major factor, but also intervening was the COVID-19 pandemic. There were also changes to Maryland law regarding living wages and also laws in Montgomery County that apply to the project. And then changes in the insurance market were also cited, as well as inflation, which is related to the delay, but also to the increased inflation that the US has been experiencing this past year. So those are the reasons cited for the increase in contracts. Exhibit 2 shows just the construction part of the contract. And the way to read this is this first column of numbers is the original agreement for construction. That was just under $2 billion. The second column represents the funds that were expended prior to this new agreement. The new contract is going to add $2.3 billion to the construction piece for the project, and that results in a new construction cost estimate of $3.4 billion. So Exhibit 2 shows the categories of the design and construction piece of the contract and shows how those have changed. So this shows by category the objects of change, and again, this $2.3 billion and shows to the total of 3.4 increase. With the new design build contractor in place and the new schedule, the new cost estimates, there's also remaining milestone payments or milestone dates that were now estimated for this project. Mobilization and construction startup is expected this spring, with the actual revenue service for the line beginning in the fall of 2026. At that time, the entire 16-mile and all stations will open up. Under a prior plan, there was a planned phased opening where a partial portion of the line would open first, and then the remaining piece at a later date. Along with the new cost and schedule is also a plan to refinance the project. So once the project reaches commercial close, which is the execution of the amended P3 contract, then the parties will work towards a financial close. In this, PLTP is expected to provide the rest of the construction costs for the project. This will entail a renegotiation of the TIFIA loan that it had under the previous financing, but had not yet drawn upon. That TIFIA loan will be up to $1.7 billion. And it also entails the issuance of additional private activity bonds, or PABs, in about $655 million amount is anticipated for that. So going forward through the rest of the construction period, MTA will make no further actual contributions. All of the progress payments have been made. There will be a $100 million payment when the project achieves revenue service. And again, that is expected in 2026. In addition to the changes to the schedule and to the costs, there are also terms to the original P3 agreement that were approved by the Board of Public Works. These are 4 main areas. The first is in risk allocation. And that's this first major bullet with all of the sub-bullets. And essentially, the state is assuming the risk for any issues or problems that are found in work that has already been completed on the project prior to the new design build contractor coming on board. But the amendments also remove the unconditional right to terminate for extended delay. This was the provision that was used by the previous design build contractor to exit the project. And the There is also a requirement for an owner-controlled insurance program through the remaining design build period. And there's a removal of light rail vehicle options. While MTA was managing the project, it did exercise an option to purchase an additional 2 light rail vehicles to allow an enhanced level of service over what was previously envisioned when the project first opened. Because those rail vehicle options were nearing the termination date, it was decided to just remove those and clean up the contract. And then finally, the contract is also being amended to streamline the claims and dispute resolution procedures. DLS just had a couple kind of comments in conclusion, and looking at this whole thing. It's easy in hindsight to maybe pick out specific things that could have been done differently or avoided to prevent the projects from reaching the state that it did. And many people have cited maybe the P3 itself, or the P3 procurement model, as a problem for this project. But DLS does note that the same problems could have been experienced by MTA had it done a more traditional procurement of a design build contract, because it really was that design build phase of the contract that had the issues that led to the contractor leaving the project. So one of the cautionary tales, I guess, on should be taken from this whole issue is the danger in overselling the benefits of a P3 agreement, because all P3 agreements really are just contractual agreements, and they are not a magic wand that solves everything. And even once a P3 is executed and some risk has been transferred to the private sector, that does not remove the need for all parties to remain flexible in dealing with issues that come up, that to ensure that everybody's interests are aligned to complete the project. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. I'll treat this as a budget hearing and ask if anybody has any questions for the analyst. Any questions for the analyst? Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Steve, thank you as always for your incredible analysis and work. I guess just sort of following up on the conclusion, be curious, do you or DLS have any recommendations on what could have been done differently, or potentially what additional guardrails, even absent the P3 statute, that we could look at or think about doing differently to prevent something like this from happening, regardless of the financing mechanism used?
Well, I think that, again, it's easier in hindsight to look at these things, but obviously, had the administration maybe given more in allowing some of the time and money claims, that might have changed the outcome. It would have cost more, and obviously at the time, the agency is looking at the P3 contract is saying we've got a fixed cost construction cost. But if the administration, and I've heard the governor and the BPW, say it was the lawsuit was the full problem with this project. Well, if that lawsuit caused increased costs, then the private partner does have some, basis for asking for additional funding. So that kind of came down to that. And my last point was that, it needs to be flexible. People need to look at how to keep everybody's interests aligned, and that can sometimes mean, approving some of those change orders. And of course, it can go too far. It's always a continuum, and it's very difficult to see. But which is why, again, point out that it is one thing to try to do it in hindsight, but certainly the continued flexibility and looking at what the true costs are and who might be at fault, things beyond the private sector's control shouldn't be put on the private sector. I mean, that the the issue of risk transfer is to share the risk for those things to the party most able to manage the risk. And for example, a lawsuit, that's certainly wasn't on the private partner, to do that.
Steve, the other question that I have is just, I'll say sort of anecdotally, and as as the chair mentioned, the project obviously runs through the heart of my district as well. We had some issues where it was very much sort of finger points in both directions when you would talk to the Purple Line partners and they would say, well, that's not our issue, you have to talk to MTA. And we talked to MTA and they would say, well, we've signed a contract, all of the issues with the line are being dealt with by Purple Line partners, and it would be hard to get an answer. I don't know if this is something DLS has looked into, but it seemed to me like once that contract was signed, there was a general sense among MTA and MDOT that we've sort of pushed responsibility off onto the contractor. Have you all looked at that at all? I mean, is that accurate to say that there wasn't enough oversight, or that role, again, in future contracts, if we engage on something like this, that needs to be bolstered, that there needs to be some level of oversight or accountability on the part of the government agency, even if there is a private contractor brought on board?
I mean, so, almost all construction is done by private agencies, right? This is nothing new. I guess I would fault if that is indeed the case. MTA is the lead agency on it. It's their contract, it's their contractors. So to the extent, elected officials have questions, MTA should be, the responsible party for getting that, regardless of whether they answer it directly because they're responsible for that piece, or their contractee is responsible for it because they typically don't want the legislature talking to the contractors. So it's incumbent upon them to be the conduit and be the responsive party.
I wish that had been the case early on, but thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Beitzel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, a couple questions. How much in total is the private partner borrowing, and what's his contribution to this project with the revised cost estimates?
So the total borrowing was the 1.7 billion plus the 655. So we're talking, $2.7 billion. With the increased borrowing, because the market does want to see, private equity at around 10%, the private equity piece is going up under this revised agreement to do that. As part of the settlement agreement, the private partners agreed to reduce their rate of return by 20%. Now that's a number this never disclosed, part of the business part of the contract that's redacted in the agreement. But they are taking a smaller return, but they've got now a bigger chunk. It's unknown whether they may still make more on this project, but at a lower rate of return.
And the borrowing that the private partner has obtained or will obtain at the completion of the project, is that guaranteed by the state if he reneges on the loan?
No.
Any obligation to the state to pay that?
It is all non-recourse to the state. It does count. It is reported as part of MDOT's non-traditional debt, because the source of the repayment, that money is not funding, it's only financing, and the PLTP will get all of that paid off through the availability payments that will start occurring as soon as the transit line enters revenue service. So but if Purple Line Transit Partners were to default on that, essentially it would be the bondholders that would have the interest in the project and could probably step in and assume the place. So,
And the APs, or the APs are expected to average $250 million a year over the 30-year period of this operation. Of that $250 million, how much of that is going to bond repayments?
it's the largest piece of that 250 is bond repayments. I can get you the exact.
That's in round numbers. It doesn't matter. I think I know the answer. I wouldn't ask a question, but of that, and so that of that 250 million that APs are expected to be able to operate and maintain the system and pay off the debt and manage the whole project, there will be users, and the users are expected to pay a certain amount of money to use the facility. What is the anticipated amount of money, that revenue that will be generated to farebox recovery from the users who use the system, that use that system?
So the MTA has indicated that the fares that they expect to set for this will be in line with fares in the general region. The farebox recovery has been below 30%, for several years for MTA as a whole. So, that's probably.
Well, what's that number?
I'm sorry.
What's the number that was estimated when the project started, or what's your, out of that $250 million, how much of that money is going to be, of that 250 is going to come from the users of the system that pay for using it?
I have not seen those specific numbers.
But you have an estimate.
I don't have it at hand. I will.
Well, but I mean, you're a smart guy. You know about what it is. So, in any event, is it fair to state only a small portion of that $250 million will come from people using the system, paying for ride on a system? Is that fair?
Again, 30% would mean that 70% of the cost is not being covered.
So then just using that 30% and the 70%, then where does the rest of the $250 million come from?
It comes from the Transportation Trust Fund.
That's the crux of my question. And so in the end, the state's paying for the bulk of what it costs to run this system. Is that a fair statement? Out of the Transportation Trust Fund. So the users are only using this, paying a small portion of the cost, what it costs to operate this system.
Project, as with any transit project, yes.
And so, this is Chairman Corman. I know probably don't like the line of questioning, but as a rural delegate from Maryland, when we look at highway user revenue and how we've been cut with all 24 jurisdictions, we're somewhere at 230 million or something like that now, or maybe a little bit more than that, to 350 million of highway revenue, user revenue goes to local jurisdictions, of which the county share in, for all the roads and all the counties and municipalities in Maryland. And when it's all said and done, when this project is done, almost as much, or maybe of the money that was going to take to operate, to pay the debt and build this system and everything, and to manage it and operate it, is nearly as much as what all the roads that are in the county and municipal roads are getting in all the jurisdictions of the state of Maryland, and where the highway user revenue is generated. Is that a true statement, or is that?
No, I think the bulk of the highway user revenues are generated in the urban counties, the big counties, and this project is running through two of those.
Well, but it's proportional to the amount of roads that they have, except for Baltimore that gets the biggest bulk of that. So anyway.
Sorry, Delegate Beitzel, I think what he meant was the revenue is generated from the larger counties. Yeah, obviously, yeah. Montgomery County generates more in Transportation Trust Fund revenue.
Yeah, right. I understand that.
I'm not trying to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure it was clear what he was saying.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Steve, just as you're following up with Delegate Beitzel in the future, I think the relevant fare box recovery is probably Metro Rail, not MTA, because that's the regional system. And Metro Rail's fare box recovery outside of COVID has been, I think, closer to 50% on the rail side.
It hasn't been big.
Just worth noting for your analysis for Delegate Beitzel. Other questions for the analyst? Okay, and Delegate Beitzel, if you have more questions, I wasn't trying to cut you off. I just wanted to make sure. You good, Delegate Beitzel?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay. Okay, we will now turn to the Department of Transportation as they are hopping on. I just want to note that Secretary Ports did intend to be here, but he had an immovable conflict, and he was kind enough to let me know that. So we are sorry he's not here, but understand that people have other things going on in their lives. We are joined by Holly Arnold, the Administrator of the Maryland Transit Administration, Matt Pollock, the Executive Director of Transit Development and Delivery, and Jacqueline Hartman, the Chief Financial Officer of the department. Obviously, we appreciate all your work. Let me just say, as someone who has this project on the ground in their district, Mr. Pollock in particular has been very accessible and helpful in talking not only to politicians and elected leaders, but members of the community as well. So we appreciate that. Let me turn it over to MDOT. Thanks for being here.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having us, Chair Corman and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Holly Arnold. I'm the administrator at the Maryland Transit Administration. And I would like to share a PowerPoint. Can you guys give me the ability to do that?
Absolutely. Hold on one second.
Thank you.
You should be good to go now.
Okay, give me 1 second to pull it up. All right, can you see that? Great. Okay. Thank you. And thanks, Steve, for the excellent summary. It covers a lot that's in my PowerPoint, so I'm going to kind of skip some of that and just kind of get to the high points. I'll start out and then kick it to Matt to get into some of the details of our construction. So again, in terms of introductions, I'm here with Matt Pollock, the Executive Director of the Transit Development and Delivery Group, which is overseeing the Purple Line, and Jacqueline Hartman, the MDOT Chief Financial Officer. So just as a reminder, I know you're all very familiar with the project. Here is the map. It is a 16.2 mile line between Bethesda and Montgomery County and New Carrollton and Prince George's counties. It's going to operate mostly on the service with 21 stations. It truly is a regional project and a regional connector, connecting with Metro in 4 different locations, all 3 of the MARC lines, Amtrak at New Carrollton, and the numerous regional and local bus services throughout the region. Going back to the original agreement, and Steve covered a good bit of this, it was with the concessionaire Purple Line Transit Partners in 2016 for a 36-year term, 6 years to design and build, and 30 years to operate and maintain through a design, build, finance, operate, and maintain public-private partnership. So what the state gets out of that essentially is the concessionaire designs, constructs, and operates the 16-mile light rail line, allows us to make deductions on those availability payments if the performance standards aren't met. We're transferring risk to the private sector while maintaining the ability to set those transit fares. And the debt, most importantly, I think, held by the concessionaire allows the state debt to be used elsewhere to continue to advance other transportation projects throughout the state. PLTP gets the security of the long-term operations of the light rail line, and the state does assume the revenue risk with them being paid through availability payments. The project is incredibly important again to the region. It's going to create several new multimodal connections, expand transit opportunities in 2 of the fastest growing counties in the state, improve access to jobs and community services for neighborhoods that are highly transit dependent. And both counties have been incredibly supportive of the project and are excited to have it. Spur economic growth. I will note, especially Prince George's and Montgomery counties have been already planning for transit-oriented development around the stations. And so once we're up and running, they're fully going to be ready to take advantage of that. And then finally, again, relieving automobile congestion and providing environmental benefits throughout the region. Some of the challenges that we've had, again, Steve covered this well. I think the biggest one to highlight is when the record of decision was vacated. So that lawsuit essentially set us back 16 months. So we lost a year on the project. And during that time, we were unable to reach an agreement on the additional time for the audit, other delays with PLTP. They had a claim of $800 million. We weren't able to come to agreement on that, but we were still committed to advancing the project. And so in December of 2020, we took a settlement agreement to the Board of Public Works to resolve the disputes, the litigation, and the claims on the project, remove the prior design builder and work with PLTP to bring on a new design builder, a $250 million settlement payment, and then agree to work together to bring on the new design builder and update the cost and the schedule of the project, which we most recently did at the January BPW meeting. And the state retained project control during resolicitation and really took on a lot of the construction of the Purple Line. And I'm going to turn it over to Matt to talk about the construction we've done and where we are now.
All right, thank you, Administrator. Good afternoon, Delegate Corman and the rest of the subcommittee. For the record, Matthew Pollack, Executive Director of Transit Development and Delivery for the Maryland Transit Administration, and I am responsible for delivering the Purple Line. We have not taken our foot off the gas to deliver this project, and we have been doing a lot of work during this interim period of the resolicitation, including advancing the remaining design components to approximately 95%. We've been relocating miles and miles of underground and overhead utilities, water, gas, sewer, storm drain, telecommunications. We've been advancing the production of the light rail vehicles in Elmira, New York. And we have also obtained final approval on our required Maryland Department of the Environment MDE permits. This photo shows some of the work that has been going on. Top left, you see the commissioning work that's taking place inside the Glenridge Operations and Maintenance Facility. Below that photo, you can see the ongoing work at the Campus Drive Underpass at the campus of University of Maryland. Center photo, that's our, with the green construction vehicle, that is our work on top of the Sleaford Underpass. And on the right side, we're showing some of our Verizon relocation work taking place on Ellen Road near the New Carrollton Station. Next slide, please. All right, this was touched on a little bit by Steve, and I apologize if I repeat anything, but PLTP, assisted by the state, conducted an accelerated resolicitation process to obtain our new design build contract. And as part of this robust competitive process, we started about a year and a month ago with a release for the request for qualifications. We shortlisted 3 responsive proposers and sent out an RFP to those qualified proposers in March of 2021. We took in 2 compliant proposals in October, and after going through an evaluation, PLTP in consultation and with the concurrence of MDOT-MTA selected the proposal from Maryland Transit Solutions, a joint venture comprised of Dragados USA and OHL USA. That MTS proposal was selected for having the strongest technical participation as well as the lowest price, giving us the best value. Now, taking a look at the 2 design build contractors that make up Maryland Transit Solutions, they're both quite large and quite well connected in the P3 contracting world. Looking at Dragados, they are working on the LAX automated people mover P3. That's the largest contract ever executed by the city of Los Angeles. They're also working on an I-595 corridor P3 down in Miami, or I should say they've completed that, which was Florida's first P3 and the largest project ever executed by Florida DOT. Looking at OHL, they're also one of the world's largest construction companies, and their portfolio, most importantly, includes what I'm showing there on the left side, the Long Island Railroad's 3rd track expansion, which is a huge project in the densely populated New York City. That project experience is especially relevant for us on the Purple Line because a number of their key staff are transitioning over from that project, moving down from New York into Maryland. That includes their construction manager, their quality manager, and their systems integration manager. Next slide. This is showing an updated view of the Concessionaires organizational structure. You know, and we now have Dragados and OHL operating as Maryland Transit Solutions in our design build contractor box on the left. You will note that PLTC and Fluor Corporation is no longer involved at any level of the organization, and that is per the settlement agreement. Next slide. All right. While much of the P3 agreement remains unchanged, there were several important changes required to move this critical project forward. We now have in our P3 agreement an updated construction cost and the new design builder's schedule to take the project into revenue service. We have an updated financial plan with our financing costs, and updated pricing for operations, for maintenance, insurance, and life cycle renewal. And as Steve mentioned, it does include some updated terms, risk allocation, contract termination, insurance, light rail vehicles. One thing that won't change is that MTA will continue to be in charge of the project. We retain ownership and oversight of the Purple Line, and we remain ultimately accountable to you, the legislature, to the Board of Public Works, and to the public for successful delivery of this Purple Line project. Next slide. The updated design build contract, $3.4 billion, that includes the design and construction work completed by the prior design builder and the fixed price bid for the new design build contractor to take the project into revenue service. Steve mentioned that this is the total P3 cost covers more than just this design build cost. It's the entire amount of payments that are going to be made over the 40-year life of the agreement. Note 40, it was originally 36. We now have 40-year life of the agreement. It's covering all of PLTP's costs to design, construct, and commission this complex project, including the financing costs, excuse me. It includes the work completed by the contractors assigned to us, to MDOT-MTA, over the past year. It includes the settlement payments previously approved by the board and already paid to the prior design build contractor. It includes the repayment of the private activity bonds that had been issued to fund construction under the prior design build contractor. It includes our capital renewal costs for the 30-year operations maintenance period, and also covers the actual operations maintenance and insurance costs as we go through that 30-year O&M operations and maintenance period. Next slide. Yeah, we've talked about this a bit too, but you know, obviously it's really worth repeating. These costs are higher today than they were 6 years ago when the P3 agreement was first approved. I guess we've discussed a couple times the lawsuit. You know, was a specific impact that caused our costs to increase. But on the other hand, you know, many of these increases are affecting projects, you know, across MDOT, across the entire U.S., and they're not unique to the Purple Line. You know, we talk about the global pandemic. How it hits us is in two major areas. We have the cost of material has gone up, and not only that, we have those supply chain issues that are delaying our material across all of our work sites. And then also we have the labor shortage, and equally devastating is the loss of experienced labor. So both of those are giving us productivity decreases and causing further delays, and in essence raising pricing as well. And we talked about the wage increases and inflation. Next couple of slides are going to discuss financing, so I will pass the microphone over to MDOT CFO, Jacqueline Hartman.
Good afternoon. I'm Jacqueline Hartman, Chief Financial Officer for the Maryland Department of Transportation. Matt has already talked through many of the components of the P3 agreement and what all of the different costs included within that total agreement cost are. That total $9.3 billion P3 agreement includes all of the costs for the design build construction, as well as the O&M period and all of the associated interest payments that would be made to pay back the debt over the life of the agreement. Again, this is a total cost over a 40-year contract, so not the way that we typically look at the cost of our projects. Turning to the next slide is kind of the question of, well, how do you pay for the new design build contract costs? Matt has mentioned already the the $1.7 billion TIFIA loan that we are actively working towards. On the previous TIFIA loan that had been in place, there had been no funds drawn from that TIFIA loan. So essentially, we will just replace this new loan with that old loan. In addition, it was mentioned that we have already paid off the private activity bonds that were outstanding for this project. That has essentially allowed us to kind of create a separation between the new work done on the contract and the new financing of the contract versus the work and the financing that was done under the previous design build contractor. So with those previous private activity bonds paid off, we will issue additional private activity bonds of just under $700 million to help fund that construction. And you know, rates continue to rise a little bit, but if as of today's rates, we're still in an interest rate environment that's a little bit lower than where we were in 2016. So, you know, we will have some small amount of pickup on the interest rate side of things. In addition, it was mentioned the private equity that PLTP will be bringing into the deal of just under $300 million. That's a $280 million. And between those three components, that will fund the construction of the additional design build work to complete the project. It has been mentioned this is all non-recourse to the state. We have worked with the Treasurer's Office. The P3 law does require coordination with the Treasurer's Office on any debt issued for public-private partnerships. And so have provided assurance to them that the original structure and components of the deal back in 2016 are still the same. So although the numbers and amounts will be changing, we still have committed to the same structure that we did in 2016. And with that, let me turn it back to Matt to talk about the project schedule moving forward.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Obviously, we take a look at that fall of 2026, and that's really the hard number that everybody's focused on. But there are some interesting interim milestones that I'm certainly looking forward to, at least. And so just wanted to point those out as well. Fall of 2023, when we start getting our light rail vehicles arriving at the Glen Ridge Operations and Maintenance Facility, and then followed in the summer of 2024 when we have that test track area. That's the area between New Carrollton on the east and Beacon Heights. And we have that completed in 2024, and we're going to start kicking off that intensive local testing, our integrated testing, and we're also going to get our operators to start training while the construction is continuing, you know, across the rest of the Western alignment. Then we get into 2025, the winter of 2025, and at that point, construction is going to have progressed enough across the entire alignment that we can do the system-wide testing. That's our full operations testing and the commissioning activities necessary to prove out our safe and ready light rail line so that we are ready to begin revenue service in the fall of 2026 with a single open, no fizzed approach. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just wanted to provide a little detail about the construction transition period over the next few months. You know, as you may recall, we are doing these interim construction activities with the contracts that we took assignment of about a year and a half ago. Many of these contracts are being reassigned back to the new design builder. However, our interim construction under MDOT-MTA is not going to be stopping cold on the first day that our new design builder is under contract. We have in progress, partially completed work under our management, and we're going to be managing that construction to completion to avoid the cost, schedule, quality, and really kind of responsibility risks that would arise if we took active construction sites and we were to change contract owners mid-construction. So there's going to be continued construction under MTA. We'll be ramping down as the design builder is ramping up. And with that, I certainly thank everybody for their time, and I will pass the microphone back to the administrator.
Thanks, Matt. That concludes our presentation, and obviously we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you again, Matt. I'm happy to see that you are not tuning into this one from a vacation with your family. I know you had to do the Board of Public Works from, I think, maybe Disney. So
Yes.
hope we're not taking away from your family right now.
Nope.
Colleagues, before we get to questions, I would like to turn the floor over to Montgomery County DOT. As I said at the top, we also invited Prince George's County DOT, but they had a conflict. I believe we have Maricela Cordova from Montgomery County DOT if they have any comments.
Delegate Corman, thank you very much. My name is Emma Wolanin. I'm the Deputy Director of the County's Department of Transportation. I'm here today representing Director Chris Conklin, who unfortunately was asked by our county executive to be at another event this afternoon. With me today, and I noticed she just turned her camera on, is Miss Marcela Cordova. She is the special assistant to our Director for Strategic Projects. Ms. Cordova has been the county's primary liaison to the state for the Purple Line project, including providing oversight for the 3 county-funded projects that are part of the state's project and contract, specifically the Bethesda Metro South Entrance, the Capitol Crescent Trail, and the Silver Spring Green Trail. She's also the gatekeeper to the $40 million contribution that we've been asked to provide to the project overall. I'm here today simply to reiterate the county support for the Purple Line project. Ms. Arnold already touched on the many benefits that the region, the county, and its residents will realize. And we are committed to the continued partnership with MDOT MTA to complete the Purple Line and the county-funded projects safely and as expeditiously as possible to achieve those benefits. Delegate Corman, I want to take an opportunity to echo and amplify your recognition of Mr. Pollock. Not only has he been accessible, but he's been responsive, transparent, and just an absolute joy to work with as a true partner. With that, we thank you for your time, and Ms. Cordova and myself are here and available to answer any questions of the committee.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's support for the Purple Line. I support the Purple Line too, but that doesn't mean we can just sit back and act like this is going smoothly or the way we would like it to go or how it should go in an ideal world. So I do have some questions, and I would invite my colleagues to use their raise hand function if they have questions as well, but I'll start and hope to be interrupted by my colleagues with their questions. My first question, just for my background for the MTA and MDOT witnesses, this, I think, I guess the BPW approval, I'll put it that way, was in April of 2016. So I know I wasn't in my current position in April of 2016. I had, one less kid in April of 2016. I mean, I was in a different place in my life. So I'm curious, in April of 2016, were you in your current positions? I guess we can start with any order you presented, I suppose, Madam Administrator.
No, I was not.
Okay. Do you recall what position were you with the state in April of 2016?
I worked for MTA in April of 2016 as the manager of capital programming. So I was aware of the Purple Line and helped with the funding piece, but not actively involved in the contract.
Okay. And Mr. Pollock, I know you were not with the state in April of 2016, but maybe this is a chance for you to tell us a little bit about your background prior to joining us in Maryland. You're on mute.
Thank you, Delegate. Yes, in 2016, I was working for an engineering consulting firm. I was the Southeast regional manager for transit projects, running from Maryland down through Florida, trying to get a bunch of projects off the ground.
Got it. And you've been involved in a number of light rail construction projects, is that right?
Yes, sir. I started with my first light rail project in St. Louis back in the 1990s. It was their first light rail project. I've worked on light rail in London, in Pittsburgh, in Baltimore, streetcars down in Atlanta, and also the latest startups in Charlotte.
Aside from the Purple Line, were any of those considered P3s?
No. I was working on a design, build, operate, and maintain in Puerto Rico, but it did not have a finance component.
Thank you. And Ms. Hartman?
In April 2016, I was working for the Maryland Transportation Authority as Chief Financial Officer. And although the Maryland Transportation Authority does not have a direct role in this project, I was involved in parts of the Purple Line solicitation just because of my background in P3s from my DLS days.
Right. Thank you. I think the only person in a decision-making role who was in their current job in April 2016 is the governor, because Secretary Ron was the secretary in 2016. It obviously wasn't Secretary Ports, I think. Is there someone I'm missing? No? Okay.
I think you're correct.
Okay. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about how we got to this point. I've heard an awful lot today about court delays, as I've heard at the Board of Public Works many times over the past couple of years and in many press statements. But I recall when these problems began, I heard about things other than the court delays. Let me just stipulate, I also did not like the court delays. I found them very frustrating. I am a supporter of this project. But I used to hear about 3 other concerns that I didn't hear anybody discuss today. One is disputes between the state and the contractor over the right of way necessary for the project. Does anybody have any further information on that?
Well, Delegate, I can tell you that our real estate acquisitions are complete as far as all the original properties that we intended to purchase with the design build contract. We're still going through some of the court reconciliation with condemnations for some properties, but all of the properties are in state hands and moving forward.
Great. There was a dispute between the contractor and the state over what properties were necessary. Does anybody have any information about that historically?
Yes, I mean, that was part of the total $800 million of claims that the contractor had against the state at the time that we're progressing towards a termination.
Great. I guess I'm just trying to understand, because there'll be future projects, what was the nature of the dispute so we can figure out how to avoid having it in the future. So I really don't know, Jacqueline, what the nature of that dispute was. I'm legitimately.
Okay. So there was a fundamental disagreement essentially between the state and the contractor about the right-of-way properties that the timeline for when those properties had to be acquired. The original contract laid out a certain set of properties that had to be acquired by a certain date, and those were done by that date. There were additional properties that the contractor wanted the state to acquire, which we were in the process of doing so. They thought that should have been included in the original deadline, and we disagreed since those were additional parcels that they asked us to acquire.
Okay. And you're obviously very involved in another very large public-private partnership. So how are we mitigating that issue? How can the subcommittee and the General Assembly feel comfortable that that issue won't repeat itself in another project?
Well, I mean, I think at this time, since we're not moving forward with any right-of-way acquisitions on that project, until that Board of Public Works approval is obtained, we do have additional ability to understand exactly what acquisitions are going to be needed and the timeline of when of those are going to be required.
Okay. The next issue that I used to hear a lot about, and Matt, you referenced it as something that is now completed, but again, looking backwards 2 or 3 years, was the Maryland Department of Environment permitting process. And the time it was taking to obtain the permits, which I guess was delaying the ability to do some work. Is there familiarity with that situation? Not today. I understand today the permits have been issued, but what happened historically that caused the problem?
I think in general, the nature of the problem, Delegate, was that the engineering necessary to achieve the permits were slow or delayed in moving through the process. There was a lot of back and forth with the designs, and as a result, there was a disagreement as to whether that was due to changing requirements, which was the contractor's allegation, and our response was that there hadn't been a change in requirements and that they were just unfamiliar with the state process.
Okay, so the MTA and MDOT was working with the Maryland Department of Environment to get permits issued, and the permits couldn't be issued because of something the contractor was failing to do.
That would be our position, sir. Yes.
Okay. The third category I used to hear a lot about, but now I only hear about litigation, is the crash wall. That there was some sort of crash wall that had always sort of been viewed as necessary, and the contractor didn't want to build. Do I have that even close to correct?
Yes, that's correct. The original position of the contractor was that a crash wall was not required as it was going down around the 16th Street corridor. And so again, they were of the opinion that as it was not required, therefore it was an added piece and therefore subject to full cost and schedule justification. What we've done in the meantime is we are going ahead and we're building it. I mean, we aren't physically building it right this minute, but it is part of the new design builder's scope and it's included in there. And so it will be built.
So I guess my question is, when the locally preferred alternative was selected through the NEPA process, was the crash wall included in that? Was it covered in that at all? Or was that not referenced?
That's a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't know the answer to that, Delegate.
Okay.
Let me find out.
Anybody
Yep.
else know the answer?
It was just a disagreement about whether or not it was included or not. I think there was some unclear language.
I will talk about your favorite topic, which is the court litigation. And I guess this question is from Ms. Hartman, which is how do we avoid the same problem? Because as you know, your other large P3 is quite controversial. I'm confident there will be litigation. Maybe the judge there will apply a different standard. Obviously, the judge at the purple line was, his decision was overturned. But what's the way to, deal with this problem you're working on?
Right. I think it's important to point out that the action that the federal judge took in this case to completely set aside the record of decision that had been issued on this project was an unprecedented action. And, now even 5 years later, we have not seen this occur on other projects. So NEPA litigation is frequent with many of these large projects. And unfortunately, it's kind of almost like part of doing large construction projects these days. I think, again, it's very unprecedented action that the federal judge took. And so I'm not sure we would see that repeat itself since we have not in the last 5 years since then.
Okay, so the unprecedented action now has a precedent, which is it literally happened with this project. So I'm just going to give you another opportunity to tell me how we are going to deal with the same situation if it occurs, and hopefully perhaps it doesn't, with another P3.
We're happy to provide you additional briefings on the Oplines project if that's what you'd like. I think we're going to have our Purple Line team here today, so I don't want to kind of cross projects too much. We can make sure we have the right team on you to get those answers.
Okay, I think we should learn some lessons about the P3 law. You're intimately familiar with it. I understand it's a different type of P3 delivery. That's been repeated many times to me, but it's all under the same P3 statute. And I think if you're Delegate Beitzel from Garrett County, you don't really care if it's a purple line in my district or a road in my district. What's important is that the project get done right and in a way that's sensible for taxpayers. So I would like to hear in the future how we avoid these same problems being repeated on other projects.
Right.
My next question is, it seems obvious to me, but PLTP is not here today, right? They're not with us. Okay.
That's correct.
Last year when MTA had its budget hearing, they were able to join us. But the year before that, we invited them to MTA's budget hearing and they weren't able to join us. So were they busy today?
So as Steve said earlier, this is the MTA project. It's an MDOT project. Ultimately, PLTP is our contractor. And so we are ultimately responsible for delivering the project. And so we're happy to answer any of the questions and don't feel that it's necessary for them to join us today.
I guess it gets to the heart of what's a P3 contract versus sort of a more typical contract. Like with mobility, you have, I think, 3 contractors, right, who provide the mobility service. We don't call that a P3 though, even though they're private contractors. So I guess what is the essence of the P3 that makes this different than another contract?
You mean in terms of coming here with us today? I think
just in general.
Still the state is ultimately responsible for the project in both cases.
We talk about non-recourse, which I heard used many times, but the state's ultimately responsible. How do those two things work together?
Jacqueline, do you want to add anything here?
Sure. I think they're just very different ways of looking at the same issue. With non-recourse specifically refers to the entity that is ultimately responsible for repaying debt. So that's really a kind of financial market term. Whereas, when we speak generally about this P3 project and the Purple Line, it is a project that MTA and MDOT are delivering for the state. And so that is why we fully believe that, as Delegate Solomon mentioned, if there was concerns in the past about kind of finger pointing about who was doing what. We want to be clear that the MTA is ultimately responsible for delivering this important asset to the state.
And I'll credit Matt again for being on the ground and taking a lot of that responsibility, which we appreciate. Can you describe how you're going to avoid Maryland Transit Solutions from walking off the job if things get complicated? How are we going to avoid repeating the same precedent that we just went through?
Matt or Jacqueline, can one of you talk about the changes that we've made in the contract?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Holly. The contract, there's two ways. Obviously, there's the contractual way, and then there's like, really, what are we going to do? I mean, the contractual piece is that the ability to walk off the project unconditionally has been removed from the revised contract. So now, if there is an agreement, they can request a termination, but there is now a clause that makes it conditional, and there are steps that we can take from a contractual point of view to keep them on the job. But I guess the other point is you don't keep someone on the job just because you can. You need them to want to be on the job. So that's really the important part too. Is we have to up our game on the communication side. We have to make sure we're finding those common goals. And we're working toward those common goals. And so that, that's something that we commit to on our side.
Okay. At the December 2020 Board of Public Works meeting, Governor Hogan claimed the settlement with PLTP would, quote, save the taxpayer $500 million. Do you view the information presented here today as a savings to the taxpayer of $500 million?
I think what's important to recognize on that cost difference of what we paid for the settlement versus what the contractor was claiming. Matt mentioned the $800 million in claims that had already been put in by the previous design build contractor. We ended up settling those for $250 million. And we don't know what that number would have been if they were still on the job. Excuse me, that $800 million was pre-COVID. So, based on what we had seen from that contractor, we are sure that number would have exploded much bigger than $800 million if they were still on the job today.
Okay, so you view this situation as having saved inflation-adjusted dollars for the state?
I think the key is that compared to the contractor claims, the settlement was a lesser amount.
Okay. In responses provided to the subcommittee in December of 2021, it was actually December 28th, that's helpful. We were getting an update on the utility relocation. And we were told the original estimate for the utility work was $129 million. And now you're estimating utility relocation cost of $345 million with the work still not being done. So first, I guess my question is, when will utility work be done?
We still have probably 2 years worth of utility work. And that's unfortunately, because of the sequential nature of it, we can't send them all in at once. Even when you have a single pole, it could have 6 to 8 contractors on there, and each one of those has to go one by one. And so the sequential nature is really pushing us pretty far out there.
Yeah, it's a tough area. It's very built up when it's inside the Beltway. But I guess my question is, can you explain the 167% increase approximately in the cost of utilities from what was estimated 6 years ago to today?
Yeah. Let me try and do that, Delegate. I guess starting out is that the two costs are based on bid line items, and so within this lump sum bid, utility relocation, that line item is really just one of 200 lines, and so there aren't hard and fast rules for how you assign your prices to each of those line items, nor are we on the state allowed to negotiate individual line items. We're evaluating on a lump sum basis. So you get into the situation where we don't know exactly what goes into each price. For instance, when you do utility relocation, are you just doing your craft labor? Are you putting in your field engineering support? Are you putting in your maintenance of traffic and your management, your overhead costs? And so in some ways, there's flexibility in setting this up. I would say the other piece to look at probably is the idea of where utilities fits in the cash flow for the two bids. whereas in 2016, the utility work was further out. So any money you put in there was coming at a later time. Right now, utility is some of the first work being performed. So that in some ways could incentivize putting higher costs in your lump sum bid to those early activities in order to facilitate your cash flow. Having said that, I mean, we still think that the majority of the cost difference was related to the original three drivers. That's the material supply, which is really hitting us. Ductile iron pipe, our cast in place concrete is really delaying us. Getting crews out are very difficult. We're not getting as many crews out as we want, so it's taking longer. And we do have a little bit of that inflation over the years.
Okay, thank you. I do have some additional questions, but let me give my colleagues another chance
Sure.
to chime in if they have anything they want to add. Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Although I'm more than happy to continue listening to your great line of questions. Associate myself with your comments and my constituents as well. Really appreciate it. And I do want to just echo what Delegate Corman said. Matt, you've been particularly great to work with, and I know many of my constituents have appreciated the walkthroughs that we've done, the community meetings, and obviously some of the ill will that's felt in our community is things that you're not responsible for, having not been here for from the beginning of the project. So I appreciate the new mentality of MTA, and Holly, I would extend that to you as well. To be accountable and to be responsive for issues, because that's not, I've only been in this position since 2018, but that was not always from the beginning what we were getting. So just let's say that from the outset. I guess one of the other questions I have, and I don't know, again, that you all can answer this having not been here, but one of the other issues I would add to Delegate Corman's list of three is, obviously when the governor came into office in 2015, the terms of the arrangement with Montgomery and Prince George's County changed. And there were different parameters and different requirements put on our county. And so I don't know if anybody from MCDOT or certainly maybe Jacqueline, your engagement on the financing side, can you talk at all about how the Governor Hogan's and the administration's change in posture with the two counties over the amount of money that they were responsible for, and then because of the change of financing, the change in some of the project design schemes, how that may have also contributed to the delay?
I appreciate your question. Unfortunately, I wasn't close enough to the financing in 2016 to really be able to address that well. I think, just looking at where we are today, it's important to note that despite these cost increases that we are seeing on the project, we have not asked the counties to increase their funding at all for the project. So we are maintaining that same commitment that they made in 2016 is what we are asking of them today. And the state is taking on all of those additional costs.
Well, that's not really 100% accurate. And maybe it's not a direct result of MDOT. Emil, I see you unmuted. Do you want to comment on that, particularly on the metro entrance, which obviously falls in the heart of Delegate Corman's district, but straddles our line and is important to both of our constituents?
Yeah, Delegate Solomon, thank you. I was actually, when Delegate Corman was asking where everybody was at, I was actually in this position. I was involved in the original negotiations of the MOU between the state and the county. So, back when Governor Hogan took over the project, there was a rescoping, or the project was descoped, some elements removed, and the county was asked for a sizable, a larger contribution. Then County Executive Leggett spoke with the governor, negotiated, and settled on eventually a $40 million contribution. To Mr. Pollock's credit, that was the intent of that was to be in the last couple of years of the project. We've worked continuously with Matt and his team to modify the timing of those payments. So, we're quite satisfied whether we come back again and have a further conversation based on the latest schedule. Your questions about the financing, I can't really speak to. That was our contribution. To the point on the metro station, Again, with Ms. Arnold, Mr. Pollock, Ms. Hartman not involved at the time, we were given engineering, what I'll call order of magnitude cost estimates for Metro's design and supervision, and an estimate of what it would cost for them to construct it. This is an element, the mezzanine of that Metro station, while MATA will construct, the county will pay for. We can't speak to how that number, what it was generated on. It was clear that Metro had not done a lot of design and planning. It might have been an order of magnitude level cost estimate. But as those conversations developed, it's been clear that it's been considerably more of an estimate that we need. So we have tried to program that in our capital budget. I can't really address much more than that. Hopefully, when they go through their detailed engineering and bidding, it comes in less, and we've overestimated for it. But yes, we are short of what was estimated for that project originally.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just add that to the list of MDOT failures from early on. I guess moving to sort of more practical concerns, especially on the ground in my district. Maybe Holly, this is a question for you or Matt. So we had secured a commitment from the Purple Line Partners CEO. I guess it was back in 2019. He attended a meeting, Chevy Chase, I think the Purple Line Now group had put together, and he publicly went on the record when asked about the reopening of the Capitol Crescent Trail, which obviously has been a huge loss to our community. I think everybody sees the long-term benefit. Well, not everybody. The long-term benefit to having a new trail reopen, but the delays in construction mean that our community is left without a really important, east-west path, really, for pedestrians and bikers alike, for much longer than we were under the impression we would be originally. And so we did secure a commitment in 2019 that the bike path would open potentially as much as up to a year before the actual line would begin revenue operating, because my understanding is the testing is going to go on for a while, and there's no point in which the rail line actually crosses over the trail. And so it's possible to open the new trail before the rail line is officially up and running for revenue service. Can you all commit to that today, that we will see that same opening of the trail ASAP, as soon as it is ready for use, even before the rail line is up and running?
Matt, can you speak to the trail and where we are on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the commitment would be that certainly when the trail is ready. And so here, let me kind of explain it, Delegate. So in other words, I talked about, I think it was the winter of 2025, where we're going to have the construction progressed enough where we're going to be running up and down the alignment. During that period, there still may be requirements for the construction vehicles to access across the CCT and other places where it's the only way onto the right of way. However, it's not unreasonable to think that as we are doing that system testing and doing lots of testing in order to get to safety, that we're going to reach a point where that construction is completed and we're no longer putting vehicles across the trail. I think the ready answer, although I can't put a date on it, is if we're not using the trail for construction and we're just testing, then we would very much like to hand over the trail.
I know our community would really appreciate that,
Yeah.
And frankly, that was something that folks were very excited about in 2019.
Yeah.
And I guess the next question sort of dovetails a little bit off of that as well. I mentioned obviously the loss of the trail has been a huge impact, impact in our community, or the temporary closure of it. And I guess this is sort of one of my frustrations, and I've shared this with the SHA administrator and the previous secretary, Secretary Slater. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of interplay between MTA and the development and construction of the Purple Line and sort of a broader focus on pedestrian safety. So by way of example, and this is a very parochial issue, but in my district, obviously the trail provided the cut through essentially so that you did not have to walk or bike on East-West Highway on Route 410. And as soon as the trail was closed and there's sort of longer outstanding issues, and again, before any of you were intimately involved in this, between the county, and the state, and allowing a safer right of way through some communities and some of our local municipalities, but we have raised the issue with SHA over sidewalk access. The only chunk of 410 that does not have a sidewalk on it happens to be where that trail would have been used instead. We've not gotten a whole lot of, frankly, reply or follow up from SHA. They joined us in a town hall meeting back in July, and since then it's been quiet. It's been, oh, it's expensive, we don't have the money to do it, and so we have about a 3/4 of a mile or a mile gap where it is not safe. There is no sidewalk. There's 4 lanes of traffic, and you cannot connect from parts of Silver Spring and Chevy Chase through to Bethesda, including walking to BCC High School, where a lot of students used the trail when it was open. And so use that as one example, but the areas in and around 16th Street are sort of the same thing. And obviously none of these stations have parking with them. And so, I guess anything, probably Holly, this is more on your end, as the MTA administrator, but anything to sort of push the new secretary and just sort of in thinking collaboratively around how we address the pedestrian safety issues, how we put in place, sidewalk infrastructure and the necessary infrastructure across where all these stations are going to be in what is, not just in my district, but, especially when you get into parts of Hyattsville and in Prince George's County, incredibly urban areas where we've already seen high levels of pedestrian fatalities, and we want people to be able to take advantage of the benefits of the Purple Line. But if folks don't feel safe getting there because they're taking their life in their hands, being on foot, how we make that happen. And I haven't, there's been no sort of major commitment of we're putting $100 million into pedestrian safety money. All I hear is when we get closer, we'll sort of start figuring this out, and we'll have conversations with the counties about this. But I know that was a long question, but anything you can advocate for, or what the response is when we will see those kind of investments being made.
Absolutely, pedestrian safety is incredibly important to MTA, to SHA, to all of MDOT. And so I think that's a great reminder, and we're happy to follow up with you, have further conversations about the specific plans. I think, Matt has been incredibly busy over the past few months, advancing the current construction and getting the new design builder on board. And this is a great time to kind of revisit those discussions to ensure the future pedestrian safety on the state and county roads.
Yeah, I guess just to follow up on that, I think we've been having a lot of really positive conversations about it. Again, what I have not seen is concrete plans, no pun intended, of this is where we will see new sidewalks. This is when we will expect those sidewalks to be built. This is when we will see new crosswalks. And I know that's not directly under MTA's purview, but many of these are state roads. This is a state project. And so, maybe we can have a follow-up conversation with SHA. I don't know that we need to have a public hearing over it, but when we can see, in-depth plans, and Emil, I guess I would say the same thing if the county could be a part of that, because obviously a lot of them are county roads as well, of really seeing hardcore plans that I can point to and say to my constituents when they say I can't walk on 410, this is when we will see a sidewalk, or this is when we will see a crosswalk.
Yeah, absolutely. We're happy to follow up with you on that.
And delegates, Solomon, just to follow up, and I'm going to ask Maricela to speak to it a little bit more in detail. The county does have a capital project for making some sidewalk and bicycle connections in the areas of the Purple Line stations that were beyond the scope of the Purple Line contract. The county executive's recommended capital budget includes at least $10 million over the next several years and we've already undertaken the study to identify some of these things. So Maricela can speak a little bit more to the specifics of that.
Thank you. Maricela Cordova with Montgomery County. Yes, like Deputy Director Wolanin was saying, we have conducted and completed a BIPA, what we call BIPA study for bicycle and pedestrian improvements. And it is based on a half-a-mile radius outside of each of the Purple Line stations, and it covers improvements for pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So anything and everything between sidewalks, cycle tracks, side paths, trails, ramps, including maintenance items such as trimming and continuous maintenance of such items So we do have the money for it. We even have $700,000 or $800,000 that we're working on procuring this year of improvements that we can start working on. And it's all focused on connectivity and safety.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And I'm sorry, I should add that the study is available through our website if anyone is interested in looking through it.
Thank you for MDOT. I have some questions. I'm going to work off a little bit from your JCR submission in January 2022, although it's information you've provided in lots of other settings. I don't think there's anything surprising in here. That's just what I'm looking at, in case that's helpful. So I'm looking at page 6, and I think Matt covered some of this, but it describes the work the state has done, including advancing design to 95% completion. So maybe you can educate me a little bit. I mean, do these things not get 100% designed until like they're done, or when will it be 100% designed?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I realize that can be confusing. Any work that is under construction has been fully designed. Those items that are still being worked through are primarily the systems equipment, the power systems, the train control system, some of the communication systems, and as they're interfacing to traffic control, we haven't put any of that stuff in the ground, and some of that still hasn't even been put into complete manufacturing yet.
So who will be in charge of completing that design work?
That will be under MTS.
Okay, so PLTP's contract.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay. And then what about the next steps on the cars? I understand, we both Steve and I think maybe you touched on the cars, but what are the sort of the next steps on the rail cars?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you check the wheel sets? That's a really important question.
Luckily, it's a completely different vehicle setup for these light rail vehicles. Things are actually going quite well in Elmira. We're probably, we're given what our current schedule is, we're ahead of that schedule with the vehicles, which is not exactly saying that the vehicles are super duper fast. That's just happened to be the way our schedule lays out. We have 8 vehicles that have been completed, and they're in what we're calling ready to ship state, which means that they've already gone through their static testing. They only have a very short track, so they can't test them up to speeds or anything like that. 8 of those vehicles, complete vehicles, are ready to ship to Glenridge, and so we're paying storage costs for those right now. There are additional 10 vehicles that are going through what we're calling the static testing period. So 10 vehicles that are being tested, but are completely manufactured. And then we have 6 additional that are on the manufacturing floor in Elmira, New York. So that leaves us with 2 vehicles that have not entered into the manufacturing phase yet.
Yeah. Can I ask, this is a really layperson question, but
yeah,
the fact that they're going to be sitting in storage for years, is there any risk to that, of them not being used, just sort of sitting, and is there any warranty timing issue we need to be worried about?
That's an excellent question. I'm glad you brought it up. So when they're in storage, we are paying for them not only to be stored, but they get used. Just like you don't want your car sitting in your garage without being started. We are paying them to move the vehicles around and keep them going, and we have extended the warranties to account for the period of time where we aren't using them.
Great. Maybe my 10-year-old can be hired to play with the cars while we're waiting to actually have a system. Just to confirm what I think you said, Matt, there's no more pending MDE permits. Those are all obtained?
Correct.
Okay. And then it says that MTS will resume full-scale construction in the spring of 2022. Can you be more specific?
The specificity is a little hard. When we give them NTP, they will still have to execute their contracts. They obviously don't want to sign any contracts before they sign a contract with us. And so they will not be mobilizing equipment onto the site or signing contracts with any of their craft labor subs until we get to financial close. At that point, they're going to be ramping up. So we didn't want to give the impression that there's going to be a flip of a switch and they're suddenly going to be at full construction strength. They're intending to to start working on the construction as soon as they can and as soon as they have forces available. And we expect it to happen right away. We've also, within the design build contract, specified certain areas where we expect them to concentrate in the early areas. Some areas that you'll recognize, like a few bridges that there have been questions about. So we're getting them out into the critical areas. But what we're saying spring, because that's really when you're going to see them omnipresent across the entire alignment.
Page 9 talks about, and you spoke about, Matt, the purple line opening in one phase or no phases, but at one time. I'm old enough to remember that was actually the plan originally. And then in September of 2019, by surprise, it was announced it would open in 2 phases. And amazingly, one of those phases was going to be in late 2022. So can you just educate me a little bit on why that change took place in September 2019? Maybe it's a question for Ms. Hartman. Neither of you were in your current positions then.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where to go with that question. I'm sorry, Delegate. I don't know if Jacqueline has an answer.
Sure. I think, throughout the negotiation process, we were trying to find ways to deliver the project in the quickest way possible. We understand that there is a lot of disruption to the communities who are in this area. After further negotiations and after we started working through the design build replacement solicitation period, we recognized that the greatest utility really comes from the entire line being delivered at one time rather than in those phases.
Okay, your thoughtfulness for the disruption of the community is really appreciated. The P3 agreement cost overview, which you've shown on the screen, I think it's on page 9 of what I'm looking at, shows an increase in the operation and maintenance costs of a little over $200 million. Unfortunately, that seems very low to me. I would love it to be such a low increase, but I mean, how can we ensure that the operation and maintenance costs aren't really going to go up higher than that, based on what we're seeing in other aspects of this project and the broader marketplace, to the point you've all made a few times?
I think on the O&M sides, it's important to note that the O&M period will be based on actual inflation experience during that time. So like we did in 2016, we've made an assumption about future inflation growth, but obviously that could be higher or lower in any given year. So that is, as you said, it's not a set in stone number, it will depend. But we have essentially kind of looked at a 2% inflation, which is kind of where the Federal Reserve Board says that they target long-term inflation to be at. So that is what we've pegged to our future growth, our future inflation assumptions.
Great. And could you just help me understand, I think this is for you, Jacqueline, how the availability payments tie with inflation?
So in terms of the actual amounts paid through the availability payments over the years, there are several pieces within that availability payment. One piece was discussed is, a lot of this debt repayment portion that will be set amounts that is based on amortization schedules that are known at the time of financial close. The other pieces are insurance and the capital renewal, which is basically just kind of the larger, rehabilitation, capital rehab needs, and then the O&M piece. And the O&M piece will vary based on inflation over that time.
Thank you. Hopefully you can help me understand the equity commitment piece a little bit. It's described on page 12, but it's been described by all of you, including what's the return on the equity? It's just a piece of the availability payments?
Under the current agreement, the return is just over 12%.
Yeah, but I mean, so someone is contributing equity, and what is the funding stream to compensate them for that equity? I mean, they're investing it for a reason, not out of the goodness of their heart. So what's that money flow? Is it just from the availability payments?
The equity gets repaid much like the debt, where it's put in during the construction period of the project, and then it is repaid at a set return over the life of the agreement.
But the source for the repayment is the availability payments. PLTP is receiving availability payments. They're going to pay off debt with that, and they're going to pay the equity.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. There's obviously been a lot of discussion of risk allocation. Can you just sort of walk through the changes again on risk allocation and And I've always heard from MDOT that the reason to do P3s is because you get to shift risks. So can you just sort of help me understand where we've ended up on the risks here?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things to note here is just that, we're procuring re-procuring a design build contractor 5 years after the original deal, when just the risk market and the design build market has changed greatly in those 5 years. We've seen a lot of large design build contractors leave the market completely, or else just not be willing to accept the same risks. On this project in particular, we're also asking a design build contractor to come in and complete the work of someone else, which certainly has its own challenges as well. So in terms of the risk allocation under the revised P3 agreement, we really had to take those factors into account. And when we talk about risk allocation being with the party best able to handle it, and the idea of just kind of pushing it off to the contractor, that's not always the full picture. I mean, in terms of, you can't just push off risk without expecting to pay for that risk transfer that you're taking. So there were some risk allocations that, as we went through the negotiation process, we recognized that the state is better to keep those risks, so that we're not paying the contractor a large risk premium to take those risks, rather than us just kind of be willing to accept that risk on our own. Did you want me to walk through each of the risk allocations that were made through the process?
That'd be great.
Okay. So the largest pieces are the unknown defects in the work, both done by the previous design build contractor, as well as for any work completed by MTA during the construction period. Any unknown conditions is typically a risk that is retained by the state, because the contractor can't necessarily be held liable for something they know nothing about. Because of some of the work that MTA completed during this transition period and will continue to complete over the next year, they will need to retain the risk for the work they have that was completed under their direction, which is fairly common. The risk for owner approved or owner obtained governmental approvals, which the largest piece of that being MDE, which has now been obtained. That is being retained by the state. That was an important part of the de-risking of the project that we've done over the past year while it's been under our control. So we agreed to take that risk back, since we had already largely mitigated the risk. In addition, there is some expanded relief for pandemics, which, quite honestly, we're starting to see this in a lot of construction contracts now. 5 years ago, it wasn't necessarily a thing, quite honestly. So now a lot of—
It only feels like 5 years. It was probably 2 years ago.
Right. True. And then finally, on the LRV piece, or the light rail vehicle piece, because the replacement design build contractor was not there to make the selection of the light rail vehicle supplier or the vehicles themselves, there is some limited relief that the state is assuming that essentially, if there are certain issues with those light rail vehicles, that the design build contractor who's now coming in the door really had no way of being able to, no way to mitigate those risks, then those risks are retained by the state. However, just to note, there still is some requirements for the light rail vehicle in terms of them delivering what they said they were going to deliver. I think those are the primary risk allocations, risk transfers that we've taken through the settlement process.
I'm going to say something, and I think you're not going to hear me, just as you think I never hear you, which is that the risk and the recourse was always with the state, regardless of what was in the contract, and it still is. My last question in this sort of category, which I think is for you, Ms. Hartman, is can you just discuss the changes to the claims and resolution process, which are referenced at the bottom of page 13? Obviously, that was a big part of the issue we just went through.
Sure. On the dispute resolution process, we've made kind of a broader use of the dispute resolution board. There were dispute resolution boards contained in the original contract, but there is a new streamlined process in the revisions to the P3 agreement There are also some some finite timelines that were set on the dispute resolution process so that we can reach agreement on issues before they kind of drag on for many years.
Okay. I have a couple of geographic parochial specific questions that probably for Matt, although McDot might have thoughts as well. The first one is the timing on the remaining demolition that needs to be done in Bethesda, or the dynamiting that needs to be done in Bethesda.
I don't yet have a solid schedule for the work in any of the areas. Right now, we have milestone schedule, which gets us to our fall of 2026. And right now, the detailed schedule is only at the 120-day level. During that 120 days, they're going to be giving us a full construction schedule for approval, and that's going to give us all of the details for the specifics. I will say, though, that they are putting a separate crew and separate project manager on the Bethesda site and treating that as a separate project that they're going to run in parallel with everything else.
Okay.
They being the design builder.
Sorry, before the issues with the contract, I recall that there was reporting on problems with the concrete that was poured into the shaft there. Do you know the status of that? Inspection, I think.
I think we have reconciled all outstanding non-conformances from the departing PLTC. So we should be starting with a clean slate.
Okay, I'm guessing you're not going to have specifics on this either, but Elm Street in my district has been closed for 6 years. Any idea when that might reopen?
Right now, I think it's only being used as access to the new car property. And I think actually we are going to shrink that area that they have access to again when they start working in the shaft right away. So it'll probably end up being less access for a while in order to finish off the work.
Okay, I was asked to thank you for your work on the Sleaford Road Underpass. I was curious on the timing of that, if there's any update.
I think we're right now, it's that supply chain delay. I think it's really the storm sewer pipes that are holding us up. I think most of the work on the top of it is done. I believe the light poles are in place, the stairwell, although it's a stairwell to nothing at this point. But I mean, obviously, we just want to clear the underneath area. That is still we're not handing that over to the new design builder. We're finishing that ourselves over the next couple months.
Further to the east, one of my colleagues asked me to talk about the situation on Universal, Wayne, and Piney, where I think there's been a lot of problems on the road, and those problems, I guess the paving machine is broken, so they're not being fixed, and drivers, I also care about drivers, are being adversely affected. Yes, you are correct, and that's an area we probably could have done a little better in. Basically, we put in a concerted effort to get a bunch of paving across the alignment before winter hit in order to resolve some of the problems with some of the rough driving. We did not perform as well as we could have at Wayne, and in particular in the Wayne and Dale area. The paving company that we had doing the work sort of ended up not performing and sort of walking off with their paving machine when it hits some items. So we're in the process of right now trying to find that replacement paving contractor to just come in. And unfortunately, we're dealing with asphalt plants being in many cases closed for the winter. You know, what my folks were telling me is that they're looking at a March solution. I said, well, let's try and find a February solution. So that's where we are right now, Delegate. Thank you for your work on that. My last question is related to both the south entrance, which was sort of touched on, and also the dreamed of Capitol Crescent Tunnel under Wisconsin. I mean, I'll just say, speaking for myself, again, believe it or not, a Purple Line supporter, one of the things I always liked about the project was that you were no longer going to have the at-grade crossing at Connecticut for the trail. And I sort of hate to see an at-grade crossing at Connecticut for the trail be replaced by an at-grade crossing Wisconsin on the trail, which is kind of what's happening right now. I had heard that there was an interest by the county, and I don't speak for the county folks here, they can speak for themselves, in working with the state on some support for both parts of that, sort of the south entrance and the tunnel under Wisconsin. Is there any update there, any progress there, any thoughts there at this time?
I don't have any information on the state side right now. I will defer to see Marcella or Emil.
Delegate Corman, in the county executive's recommended budget, he has proposed a delay in that project. The council's assumption assumed external funding that has yet to materialize, and until such time that it does, I know we will be pursuing a federal grant for that project, and if that materializes, the executive would reaccelerate the project.
Okay. I've exhausted my questions. I don't know if any of my colleagues have any others. Okay, let me give MTA and MDOT a chance if there's anything you want to say to wrap up. Obviously, you've had to withstand quite a bit of questioning here, so I want to give you the chance to say anything that you feel needs to be said.
I'll go ahead and just want to thank you all for your time this afternoon. Obviously we are committed to finishing the project. As I said, as Steve said, it is a very worthy, needed project and will make a huge difference in the region. And so we, I think, now have the right team in place, both at MTA and with PLTP and bringing MTS on board, and have put in place the right procedures to ensure that we're going to deliver a successful project over the next 4.5 years.
I hope that all turns out to be correct, but we will be in regular contact to make sure it is. So really appreciate everybody being here on a Friday afternoon, and the indulgence of my colleagues as well for all the questioning. I'll share that with Delegate Solomon, his questioning. So appreciate everybody's time. Have a great weekend. And I think with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.